Welcome back. This is the second Sertz tutorial, the tool for designing storage solutions for your board games. Last time we talked about some of the controls, and we even created our first storage solution for a fictional game called Zombie Wizards. Well, we didn't really create a whole storage solution, but we did create the dimensions of our box, and that's the starting place. In this tutorial, we're going to create our first tray, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what these controls do and a little bit some of the concepts. So to begin with, let's say that our fictional game Zombie Wizards has a game board that's made up of tiles. And so we have a bunch of tiles for this game, and there are a bunch of different types of these tiles, and we don't really enjoy searching through the tiles to find specific ones. We like to make that a little simpler, maybe by dividing them up so they're not just sliding all around the bottom of the game box. So let's do that. So let's create a tray that will cover the bottom of the game box for our tiles. So the first thing we're going to do is, with the game box selected, so I've clicked on the game box, you can see the dotted line. We're going to make sure, so I'll talk a little bit about these chamber selection modes in a minute, but we're going to go ahead and create a tray. So you'll notice up in the create section we have what's called a create space. And then we have two different types of tray, with and without a base. And really the only difference is with the trays with a base is that you have a piece of foam board glued to the bottom of the walls so that it can be a tray that you can lift out of the box. Since we're building our first layer, and I'm kind of thinking this is something that we're going to leave in the box, we're not going to pull it out. We're going to go ahead and create a tray that's just the walls without a base. We'll let the box be the base of this tray. So let's go ahead and do that. Clicking on the create tray button puts a tray, a default size. It's 50 by 50, and it's also 50 tall, as you can see in the front view. And it puts it inside of our box. If it can't get it inside the box because we have other things in here, it'll put it on the outside, so no worries. And then to move this guy around, you can just click and drag on it, and I can drag it in and out of the box. You notice that while it's inside the box, it has these helpful guides. Note that everything is in millimeters, so we know that our game box is 250 millimeters tall and 200 millimeters wide, and this tray divides that up, and so you can actually see how much space you have available around it. Well, it doesn't make sense to make such a small tray and put it in here. What we really want is a tray that fills the entire side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it up into the corner here. You see the wall kind of butt up against the outside of the game box. And we're going to go ahead and drag this so that it fills the entire space. Something you might notice is this dimensions. Let me go ahead and drag this tray out of the box. You can see that this tray is 190 by 240. Why the difference? We made it fill the entire side. Remember that these dimensions are inside dimensions, inside the walls. So our walls take up 5 millimeters. That's how much we specified in the first tutorial because we're using a standard foam board from the craft store. So 5 plus 5 is 10, and then take that away from 250 to get you 240, and so on. So that's just explaining the difference there in case that's confusing. We'll go ahead and put the tray back in there. You just drag it back in. It should snap back in if it fits. If you've changed the size of the tray and it's too big, it won't go in. That's how that works. This tray here we're going to be using to store our board tiles. So let's go ahead and name that accordingly. So you can do that just by double clicking. So let's double click on it. Yeah, it says tray 1 here. We're going to change that to board tiles, I guess. Notice you also have some wall configuration options, so you can actually turn the base on if you really want to have a base. You can turn walls on and off if that's the case, but we're just going to leave it the way it is and click OK. All right, good. So now we have our tray. You'll notice if I drag this out, it says it's board tiles. Here's the game box. When it's inside, it always puts a subtitle of its parent. So that way you can say, oh, this is the game box, and I've got board tiles. All right. This is great. So we have our first tray. It doesn't have a base. You can see it over here. The default size was 50 by 50 by 50. It's a little tall. I think for our tiles, let's say we measured our tiles and decided that 30 millimeters is more than enough space to keep those map tiles in control. So let's go ahead and drag the size down to 30. Now, if you preferred, you could have modified it here directly. If you prefer to just type numbers in, I like to make the fine adjustments on the screen when possible. And then another thing I'll point out is colors. Notice that there's this yellow color which has been staring you in the face the entire time, and then there's these green colors where the walls are. If I drag this out, colors are an indicator of height in Sertz. They aren't meant to be that you can tell what height something is by its color. It's really more about knowing that something is of a different height. So this is yellow and this is yellow, so you know that the base of these two objects are at the same level. In fact, if we look at this in this front view, here's our game box here and here's our tray. You see that they both sit at the same level. That's why it's yellow. However, this green indicates a wall, which is of a different height than yellow. And again, it's not so much to tell what the height is, but just that it's a different height. So that's to let you be able to see that. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we start getting some things with some more interesting heights in here. But I just wanted to point that out. All right, so the other thing I'll point out is the selection modes. Chamber is the smallest unit of selection, and in this case, the smallest unit here is the tray. This is tray selection, so this won't really change anything here. And this allows you to select an entire layer under the cursor. So now you'll see the dotted line right here is just inside the, I guess, the cyan color, which is the game box. If I click it now with the layer selection on, it selects the whole thing. It allows me to move the whole thing as a unit. You'll see that really helps when you start getting more complex designs, and we'll be switching around with these. I kind of wanted to point that out. I'm going to go back to chamber selection. All right, so now we've got this chamber. Not very useful. It's slightly smaller than the inside of the game box. It doesn't really do any dividing for us. And let's say that Zombie Wizards has 4 different types of tiles, and I want to break that up in here. So what I really want to do is I want to divide this tray up into 4 individual chambers. There's a couple ways we can do that. One way, if you know that you just want 4 chambers and you know that breaking it up that way will be enough space for all your tiles, you can just auto grid. So auto grid is this feature here, and you click on this and you can actually choose dimensions that you want to divide the space up. Before I do that, let's make sure that we've selected our tray and that we're not selecting something else. Auto grid always applies to the selected item. So going here, and I'm going to click on a 2x2 grid. I can choose any dimension that I want, up to 10x10. But we just want 2x2, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll click here, and there we go. So this tray has now been divided up into 4 sections. Notice these crosshatch lines. I will talk a little bit about that. The diagonal lines, I guess. And notice that the dimensions are 92 by 117. They're all equal. The reason that's the case is because we had this feature called Force Uniform Grid. And what that'll do is it'll say, even if there's a leftover, it will just make sure that they're all the same size. So if that bothers you, if there's different sizes, it will also bring the tray in a couple millimeters to make up for the difference. So there's actually a little bit of space here. And that's not too bad. We want this tray to be able to fit in the box anyway, and a millimeter or 2 leeway isn't going to kill you. So that's one approach to it. Let me show you what it looks like when we don't have this feature turned on. So I'm going to undo that action. I'm going to turn this option off, and I'm going to say select a 2x2 space grid. And notice that now we end up with some slightly strange dimensions. So we get 92 by 117 and 93 by 118. I don't use decimal forms of millimeters, so it's in whole millimeters. And the reason I chose to do that is because at least with cutting with a razor blade, you really can't be much more accurate than a millimeter anyway. So having a half millimeter or a tenth of a millimeter is kind of ridiculous. Maybe if someday we add a feature for cutting on a laser cutter, maybe that'll change. But for the time being, it's solid millimeters. So when you have a tray that doesn't necessarily divide up evenly, it'll add the adjustment on the last chamber of the row and column. If that bothers you, definitely leave that feature on. If you're OCD like I am and you don't like to see that and you just want it to be uniform, that's fine. But in our case, we actually have some different size tiles, and we don't really want the chambers to be evenly sized. It wouldn't make sense. We have some big ones and we have some small ones, and we kind of like to separate those out. So let's do that. Let's build it manually rather than using the auto grid. The way you would do that is again, we talked about spaces and we talked about trays. Well, we could create a tray. So let's go ahead and do that. But a tray maybe isn't really the right thing we want here, and that's because a tray is an object that you can take out of a tray. So this tray would be sitting inside of this tray, and the tray I chose was one with a base, so it actually is a full-featured removable tray. But I don't really want 4 trays in here. That doesn't make sense unless I was going to... maybe it does if I wanted to have the trays to be able to remove them and set them on the table so that people can access them. But I'm thinking I just want to divide this area up so I can put things in the box. So let's go ahead and drag this tray out for now. I'm not going to delete it. We'll actually use this tray a little bit later. But what we're really after is this thing called a space. And so I've selected my board tiles tray, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It automatically creates a 50 by 50 space. Now, one thing I'll point out that's different about spaces is that their wall height is always the same height as the tray that they're sitting in. So this board tile, you notice the walls are green. This guy was different. Remember when we had it in here, its walls were blue. And you could see here that blue and green are two different colors and two different heights. And again, don't try to understand or don't try to associate height with the color. It's like, oh, blue is always taller than green. That may not be the case. It's just really say, oh, I know that blue is a different height than green. And you can look in the side views to really get a sense of that if you don't know for sure. We're going to put that back out here. But space always has the same height. You can't even adjust the height of the space because it's a definition inside of a tray. The other thing is you see these diagonal lines. That's to sort of remind you this is a space and not a tray. Remember when we had a tray in here and if we push it up against the wall, the walls, you have two layers of walls here. That's not quite what we want. We want something that shares the wall, and that's what a space can do. So if you push this up, you'll notice it actually pushes clear up in there so that the walls merge. And this is what we want. We want the corner here to be a shared wall between this tray and this space. Okay. However, we want to make 4 of these. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's just say that we have, there's a good size, so 130 by 120. Let's say our main tiles are pretty big. Maybe these are the outdoor tiles. Let's go ahead and name them outdoor. Let's just say outdoor for now. And so there's our first space. And let's go ahead and select this. And we're going to create another space. And like I said, it tries to fit it. So we'll go ahead and expand that. And I'm going to make it also 120 tall. So that these are the same size, height-wise. And let's say this is a pathway. This is pathways. So these are pathway tiles. They're a little bit narrower. And I know that none of my pathway tiles exceed these inner dimensions of 55 and 120. Okay, so let's go ahead and create yet another one. I'm going to select this again. By the way, you can actually put spaces inside of spaces. It's a little weird, but if you want to break that up, you can do it that way. And if you accidentally have one of these selected, when you click on create a space, it'll put it inside of there for you. But let's go ahead and continue with this. By the way, and another thing is if you select a space, you can always delete it. If you hit the delete key on that, it'll go away. So let's just do that. Gone. Be careful with the delete key. If you can also do delete from here. You can delete selected. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these others. All right, so board tiles here. I'm going to make a space. You know what? I kind of want to put that here and maybe 50 by 115. And these are indoor tiles. These are actually hallways. I don't know. And you could actually stop here. This would be good enough for the design. It would actually give you the designs for building these walls inside of here. You don't have to populate this, but if you really want to, if you want to have a name, I like to have a space in there because then I can name it. Let's go ahead and fill that space. We'll double click. We'll call that rooms. I don't know. Okay. So we got our outdoor. We got pathways, hallways, and rooms. Okay. And here we've divided our tray up into the 4 sections. We know what each of them are for, so that when we look at this later, we can identify what we intended these for. We did AutoGrid originally, but that didn't really suit our needs. This is a little bit more designed to our needs. We could add more spaces in here to break this stuff up a little bit more if we realize that the outdoor tiles, this is way too big for them, and we can maybe cut this in half and whatever. So there's a lot of things we can do at this point. If I want to drag the tray out of the box, you'll notice if I'm in chamber selection mode and I grab this, that's not going to work so well. So the rooms pops out. So I need to go into tray selection mode so I can actually drag the tray out. So that's just demonstrating how that works. And you can work with the entire tray as an entity. And I think that's all we're going to do in this tutorial is we've created our tray. In the next tutorial, we're going to create a few trays to add on top of this so that we can start storing tokens and I don't know what else goes, dice and other bits that go with this game. So we'll do that, and I think we'll just leave this tray on the desktop for next time, and we'll go from there. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.